Have you ever lived in a house where you were too afraid to even breathe? A place where every time that person walked into the room, you and your child would both hold your breath? They didn't need to scream, they didn't need to hit, but with just a look, a sigh, or words sharp as knives, they turned the entire house into an invisible prison. You found yourself shrinking, apologizing for things that weren't even your fault. You started to think maybe you were the problem. And you stayed, thinking you were trying your best. But the truth is, you were being eroded, day by day. I lived like that, in my own home, until one day I realized, toxic people don't need to raise a hand. All they have to do is plant the idea that you're not good enough. And just like that, you lock the cage yourself. In this video, I'll reveal 9 subtle but dangerously destructive traits of toxic individuals through the lens of Stoic philosophy. If you suspect someone is slowly making you lose yourself, watch to the end. Because just maybe, you'll find the path out. What you're about to hear next could change the way you see your entire life. Hit subscribe, like, and stay with me, because the final minutes will be the most important. There's a kind of person who never needs to raise their voice. No threats, no yelling, no insults. They won't openly call you a failure. They won't humiliate you in front of others. But somehow, every single conversation with them leaves you carrying a heavy, lingering sense of guilt. And the scary part is, sometimes you don't even know what you did wrong. I used to be in a relationship like that. She wasn't violent. There were no beatings, no dishes flying across the room. But every time I came home late from work, just walking into the house and seeing her cold, blank face, I'd instantly feel like something was wrong. No accusations, no harsh words, just silence. The way she'd walk past me like I wasn't there, that alone made me feel like an irresponsible husband. And so I apologized. It kept happening. First, it was coming home late. Then it was forgetting to do the laundry after playing with our kid. Then it was going out for soccer with my friends, at a time when she was upset and I didn't know. Then it was making a joke that deeply hurt her. I apologized, again and again. And the more I apologized, the smaller I became. Every time I said I'm sorry, I swallowed another piece of my pride. Not because I was too proud to apologize, but because I honestly didn't understand why I had to. And that cycle went on for years. Toxic people don't need physical power to control you. They use something much stronger, guilt. And they plant it in your head silently, consistently, like water dripping on stone. One day you wake up and realize you're gone. The man who used to be decisive, strong, principled, is now just a guy living in fear, constantly apologizing and desperately trying not to mess up again. But here's the thing. Sometimes you didn't mess up at all. You were just different. You didn't react the way they expected. You couldn't predict their emotions, and that hurt them. But instead of communicating those feelings in a healthy way, they chose to make you feel guilty, because that's how they maintain control in the relationship. In Stoic philosophy, this is emotional blackmail. The manipulated party gradually loses the ability to distinguish between I actually did something wrong and I'm being blamed for someone else's emotional volatility. Epictetus once said, "We are not disturbed by events, but by the views we take of them." That quote seems simple, but it's a steel bar locking countless men inside their own minds. When someone tells you they're upset because of you, and you automatically believe that means you're wrong, you surrender your power of judgment. You start living by someone else's moral compass. You no longer know where right and wrong are. You only know that if they're upset, you must apologize. I once spoke to a man in a private session. He told me, "My wife cries a lot. Every time she cries, I feel like I'm a monster. Sometimes I forget anniversaries. Sometimes I'm too busy with work to call. But sometimes I'm just silent because I'm tired, and even then she cries. So I apologize. Eventually I stopped expressing myself. I just try to guess what she wants and make sure I don't hurt her again. But the truth is, I'm the one who's hurting." He wasn't weak, but he was trapped. And that's what many men go through without realizing it. They're not being yelled at, they're being erased. They're not being hit, they're being peeled apart from the inside out. They're not being forced, they're voluntarily carving themselves down to fit into someone else's mold. In Stoicism, nothing is more dangerous than losing your faculty of reason. When guilt leads your actions, you are no longer a sovereign being. You are a hostage of misinterpretation. And that guilt is often reinforced by one deceptively simple phrase. I'm not blaming you, I'm just sad. It sounds innocent, but it carries weight. It confuses you. You can't argue back because they're just sad. You don't dare react because you'll be labeled cold or heartless. So you apologize again. You take the blame again. You believe you're wrong again. But listen, that feeling of guilt, if dragged out long enough, ceases to be a feeling. It becomes a belief that you are the problem, that you are at fault for everything, that you deserve punishment. And once that belief is deep enough, you'll never dare walk away because you'll think you deserve to be treated this way. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, if it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. And I would add, if you're not wrong, don't apologize. Not because you're too proud, but because that's the only way to protect your integrity. Learn to pause every time you feel guilty and ask, did I really do something wrong, or am I just being made to believe I did? And if you're a father, remember, the way you blame yourself is what your child will learn. If you apologize constantly, your child will think love means surrender. If you give endlessly and get nothing back, your child will think that's normal. And that is how one toxic person doesn't just destroy you, they poison the next generation. If you've ever lived with someone where every problem in the house, every bit of tension in the relationship, every issue that arises somehow always ends up being your fault, then you know just how soul-crushing that can be. There are people who are always right, not because they truly are, but because they flat out refuse to ever admit they're wrong. They're masters at flipping the script. No matter what happens, they find a way to twist the situation into something you failed to do, how insensitive you were, how your actions made it all possible. I used to argue with my ex-wife about money. She would overspend on things we didn't need. When I gently brought it up, her response wasn't to listen. It was to fire back. Why should I save money when you never even take me out? Why should I be careful with spending when you throw all your time into work and don't care about your family? I bought this because I was lonely. I'm tired of living with a man as emotionally dead as you. And just like that, a conversation about budgeting turned into a trial where I was the defendant. I'd end up apologizing again, promising to change again. And the real issue? It vanished, buried under a fresh pile of accusations she'd crafted and handed to me to carry. Toxic people are incredibly skilled at turning any conflict into an opportunity to dump blame. And they do it with finesse. They don't yell. They're not aggressive. They just ask a few leading questions. Why do you think I'm like this? If you really cared, would I even be in this state? Look again, who really started this? And if you're not careful, you'll get pulled into that trap. You'll start combing through everything looking for where you went wrong. You'll start doubting yourself. You'll slowly back down, making room for their perfect innocence to shine. In Stoic philosophy, this is the beginning of losing your inner freedom. Epictetus said, "We can't control others, only our responses." But the moment you let someone else control your response, you've handed that power away. People who never take responsibility aren't just dishonest. They offload the weight of their own flaws onto you. And the longer you stay with them, the more burdens you end up carrying, mentally and emotionally, that were never yours to begin with. And if you're a decent man, it's even worse, because your instinct is to protect, to take on the load, to fix things. So when they blame you, you don't fight back. You think, maybe I really didn't do enough. You take the hit. You stay quiet. You hope your sacrifice will bring peace. But the more you stay quiet, the more ground you lose. Until one day you realize, in their eyes, you're never right. Even when you are, they'll still find a way to say you're at fault. They'll say you don't open up, but when you do, they'll say you're blaming them. They'll say you don't give feedback, but when you do, you're suddenly controlling. They'll say you don't listen, but when you do, they'll use what you heard to build a stronger case against you. It's a trap with no exit. Stoics believe no one can control everything. That's why humility is needed to admit when we're truly wrong, but also strength to reject responsibility that isn't ours. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When others do wrong, don't rush to anger. Ask yourself, have I done the same? If not, stay firm and live by your values." But you know what causes most men to abandon their values? Not guilt, not weakness, fatigue. The exhaustion of knowing that every time you speak up, it starts a war. The exhaustion of seeing every word twisted to prove that you're the villain. The exhaustion of watching everything you say turned into ammo to show that you are, and always have been, the problem. I call it moral exhaustion, the state where you no longer have the strength to argue, to defend, to explain. Not because you're wrong, but because you've been drained dry from constantly carrying responsibility for someone else. That's how a toxic person turns you into a shadow, inside your own life. And if you've lived through that kind of relationship, let me tell you this. You don't need to take the blame for everything just to prove you're a good man. You don't need to carry all the responsibility in hopes they'll feel things are finally fair. And you don't need to stay somewhere that forces you to bow your head just to keep a fake peace alive. Epictetus reminds us, choose to live among those who share your values. If not, preserve your dignity by walking away. If they refuse to take responsibility, then your only duty is to take responsibility for your own life. Not by carrying more weight, but by living right. For yourself, for your kids, and for the man you're losing. One day at a time. This isn't just a video. This is the reminder you needed today. Hit subscribe and like if you want someone in your corner pushing you to live by your real values. Sometimes, someone doesn't have to insult you directly to make you feel small. All it takes is for them to talk about you half-jokingly, at the right moment, in front of the right people, and repeat it often enough. And you'll eventually start questioning your own worth. I remember those moments clearly. Friends would come over, or we'd be at a big family gathering, supposedly times for connection and warmth, but she always found a way to highlight my flaws like they were punchlines. If he ever managed to fix a light bulb, the sky would probably fall. Or, my husband's always daydreaming, leaves everything at home for me to handle. Everyone would laugh. I'd laugh along too, like I really was just a walking joke. At first, I told myself it was just affection in disguise. Couples tease, right? No big deal. But then I noticed something. Anytime someone complimented me, even the smallest praise, she'd immediately cut in with something to deflate it. When I mentioned starting a podcast, she shut it down without missing a beat. "You'll drop it in 3 days. You always do." Everyone laughed again. I went quiet again. It didn't hit like a punch to the face. It was more like a slow grinding down, a quiet erosion. Little jokes, harmless teasing, personal details thrown out in public, repeated enough times. And I realized I wasn't just being teased, I was being systematically diminished. The thing is, she never did it when we were alone. It only happened in front of others, like the presence of an audience was the stage she needed to play out these little takedowns. When I brought it up, she said, "You're too sensitive." I was just joking. But why were the jokes always at my expense? Why was I always the punchline she needed to be funny? In Stoic philosophy, this is what we call the loss of internal boundaries. Epictetus said clearly, we can't control what others say, but we can control how we interpret and respond. But when you live in a relationship like this long enough, you start believing, maybe I really am that pathetic. I began to shrink. I stopped sharing what I was working on. I stopped talking about the things that excited me. I was afraid I'd be mocked. Afraid to speak about dreams, new projects, the stuff that lit me up, because I knew there'd be someone there, ready with a quick line to shut me down. And the saddest part? That person was someone I once believed would be my biggest supporter. A man once told me in a closed session, "She tells our friends I'm spineless, that I can't make decisions. When I stay quiet, she says I'm cold. When I try to speak my mind, she hits me with, 'Don't try to act smart.' I'm so worn down, I don't even know who I am anymore." That's what constant belittling does. It strips away your ability to define yourself. Confidence, the most vital trait in a man, starts to crack. You walk into meetings timid. You meet friends with caution. You can't even speak proudly about what you believe in anymore. Toxic people don't have to stomp on you. They just have to talk about you like you're never quite good enough, and do it often, subtly, and long enough. In Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius taught, don't let your mind become a warehouse for others' opinions. But in real life, when you're with a partner who constantly says things that chip away at your worth, especially in front of others, it's almost impossible not to absorb that poison. Because you love them, because you trust them. And that's what gives their words so much destructive weight. We often think people put us down because they hate us, but sometimes it's because they fear us rising. They fear our success. They fear being left behind. They fear we might no longer need them. So to stay on top, they weaponize seemingly harmless words. And over time, you forget you once had dreams, opinions, backbone. You become someone who holds back, someone who self-censors, someone who stays quiet. I once turned down a project opportunity just because after a family gathering she said, don't take on so much. You want to do everything, but when has anything ever come of it? It sounded soft, but it hit me right in the fear I already had, that I wasn't good enough. So I backed off. Looking back, I now understand. My worth isn't in what others say. It's in what I do every day. And I let someone strip that from me far too easily. If you're in a relationship where the other person always feels the need to clarify when someone compliments you, always corrects you when you get recognition, always mocks you when you express yourself, then you need to face that. Not because you're weak, but because no one can hold on to self-respect if they're constantly being torn down in public. Someone who truly loves you will protect your image in front of others, even when you mess up. They won't turn you into a joke. They won't parade your failures around for laughs. And if they need to criticize, they'll do it privately, with respect and a desire to see you grow, not to show off their superiority. And if they won't do that, then you have to be the one to stand up for yourself. Don't wait for them to stop. Start by not staying silent. They say silence is golden, but not all silence is peace. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from maturity or calm, but from a deliberate need to manipulate and mentally punish. And when it shows up in a close relationship, it stops being silence. It becomes a weapon. Cold, calculated, and corrosive. I lived with someone like that. Whenever something upset her, she wouldn't argue, wouldn't raise her voice. She just went completely silent. She'd still move around the house, cook, clean, but with the kind of silence that made it feel like I didn't even exist. I'd try to start a conversation, nothing but a blank stare or dead silence. I'd ask, "What's wrong?" No reply. I'd suggest, "Can we talk for a minute?" Still nothing. Sometimes that silence lasted an entire week. At first I was angry, then I got worried. Then came the self-blame. I'd replay everything in my head, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. What had I said? Where did I mess up? And when I couldn't figure it out, I did the only thing I knew: apologize. Even if I didn't know why. Just to break the silence, just to ease the tension, just to get things back to normal. But that normal never lasted. It was only the calm before the next emotional siege. Stoicism teaches us to face our emotions, not to run from them. But those who use silence as a weapon do the opposite. They don't express anger. They don't communicate. They withdraw into a cold shell and leave the other person guessing, suffocating in prolonged tension. This is passive aggression at its most dangerous, a form of emotional punishment that's every bit as damaging as violence. In Discourses, Epictetus wrote, "If someone does wrong, speak to them, with kindness and clarity, not to win, but to understand." Intentional silence doesn't foster understanding, it builds anxiety. It's like living in a house rigged with landmines, never knowing when one will go off. You live on edge, censoring every word, every action, just to avoid being ignored again. I used to feel like a failure every time it happened. No one yelled at me, no one cursed me, no one laid a hand on me, but I still felt slapped across the face. I felt like a child waiting to be forgiven for something I didn't even understand. Once, I decided not to apologize. I wanted to see if she'd be the one to break the silence. Day 3, Day 4, Day 5, nothing. I'd come home from work, she'd cook, clean, move around like a shadow. On the 7th day, I cracked. I couldn't take it anymore. I spoke first, not because I was wrong, but because the isolation had drained me completely. And that's the most dangerous thing about using silence as control. It makes the other person feel small, worthless, like they deserve to be punished. Toxic people don't need to say a single word. They let you punish yourself. A man in a support group once told me, every time we argue, she says nothing. She goes to bed facing the wall. The next morning she still makes breakfast, still takes the kids to school, but won't speak a single word to me. It's like living with a stranger. At first, I tried to make peace, but eventually, I was just exhausted. She didn't need to win, because she already knew how to make me surrender. Stoic philosophy says emotions should be governed by reason, but that doesn't mean suppressing them. Staying silent to calm yourself is admirable, but staying silent to manipulate someone else's emotions is abuse. It doesn't come from discipline, it comes from a thirst for control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't speak too much, but don't hold too much in." Harmony comes from conversation, not from sulking or avoidance. A strong relationship requires the ability to face conflict, listen, and work through it together. If every disagreement ends with one person going silent and the other forced to beg, that's not love, that's a power game. Some might say, maybe they're silent because they're hurt. That may be true, once, twice. But when silence becomes a repeated tactic over the years, it's no longer pain, it's strategy. If someone uses their hurt as justification to freeze you out, they're not resolving the conflict. They're seeking control. Stay in that kind of relationship long enough, and you'll eventually stop speaking altogether. You won't share your real thoughts, won't offer feedback, won't react, because you know if you do, you'll get the silent treatment again. And the cost of breaking that silence always falls on you. You apologize, you give in, you shrink. That's why a Stoic response starts with seeing it for what it is. You don't deny your emotions, but you don't let someone else's emotions hijack your mental freedom either. Epictetus said, if someone's actions disturb you, don't ask why they did it, ask why you let it affect you. I'm no longer in that relationship, but I know what it's like to be disciplined by silence, to be punished without a word. And it took years to rebuild the confidence, to hold my ground in a tough conversation without fearing I'd be abandoned halfway through. If you're living in a home where every conflict ends with the other person going silent instead of talking, remember, that silence doesn't build understanding. It just builds a power imbalance, where one person becomes the punisher and the other becomes the one who always pays. Love isn't silence that leaves the other guessing. Love is having the courage to say what's hard, with kindness, with respect, and with the intent to connect. If they won't do that for you, then you owe it to yourself to do it for you. Don't be afraid to break the silence, if that silence is the very thing suffocating your emotional freedom. Some relationships are suffocating, not because the other person is cruel, not because of insults or obvious mistreatment, but because every move you make, every glance, every minor decision is watched, questioned, scrutinized, and all of that control is usually covered up by a simple excuse. I'm just jealous because I love you. I was once in a relationship like that. She wasn't the jealous type who made a scene, smashed my phone, or humiliated me in public. But every connection I had, whether with coworkers, old classmates, or just casual female friends, was torn apart and dissected. She'd say, I'm not stopping you from being friends with women, but things need to be clear. And clear meant reporting my messages, call logs, even explaining why I liked a photo on social media. At first, I thought she was just insecure, and I was patient. I opened up, shared everything, kept nothing hidden, just to show her I had nothing to hide. But the more transparent I was, the more suspicious she became. It wasn't about one specific woman anymore. She started being jealous of the entire world. From an old college friend to the cleaning lady at work, to the barista on the corner, anyone could be a threat in her eyes. Her jealousy wasn't explosive. It was quiet, subtle, like poison gas leaking into a sealed room. It doesn't kill you instantly, but you slowly grow tired, drained, breathless, until one day you collapse and don't even know why. I started changing my behavior. I stopped talking to female coworkers unless absolutely necessary. I never stayed out past 8 p.m. I deleted unknown numbers. I stopped liking posts. I didn't dress up unless I was with her. I became the version of myself that felt safe enough to her, but was a stranger to me. In Stoicism, there's a concept called ataraxia, inner peace that only comes from living according to your values, free from the emotional chaos of others. But when you live with someone who constantly doubts you, controls you with their jealousy, you lose that peace. You're under constant surveillance, constantly judged, even when you've done nothing wrong. Epictetus once said, "When you try to please someone who cannot be pleased, you lose yourself, and still don't keep them." That line cut straight through me when I realized I had become that man. I changed so much to calm her down, but her insecurity didn't fade. It grew. It became sharper, spread wider, and swallowed up the last bit of personal space I had. A man once told me, "She doesn't freak out. She just asks questions like, 'Why are you wearing that nice shirt? Is there someone at work you're trying to impress?' Or, 'Why do you seem so happy after work today?'" At first I laughed it off. Later, I stopped laughing. Jealousy, when unchecked, quickly mutates into a form of toxic power. People use "I worry because I care" as justification to invade your personal freedom. They demand reports on your schedule, your calls, who you met, what you said, what you were thinking. And the tragedy is, if you refuse, you're suddenly the bad guy, cold, secretive, disrespectful. But love isn't a prison, and jealousy isn't a pass for control. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "When you try to hold on to something out of fear of losing it, you've already lost it." Irrational jealousy doesn't make people stay. It just pushes them further away, not physically, but emotionally and mentally. She used to say, "If you're honest, I won't be jealous." But the truth is, when someone doesn't trust you, your honesty doesn't matter, because they're not seeing you with reason. They're looking through a lens of fear, possessiveness, and paranoia. And that's not love. That's a silent manhunt. No bullets, but plenty of bleeding. I used to believe that if I was patient enough, kind enough, transparent enough, she would change. But no. When someone doesn't trust you, it doesn't matter what you do, they won't. And worse, when they see that you're willing to change for them, they'll just keep pushing further. From your schedule, to your words, to your friendships, to your emotions, until they want control over your lifestyle, your personality, even your dreams. That's not jealousy. That's ownership. If you're in a relationship where every little thing you do is scrutinized, where every interaction becomes a threat, where every defense is treated like a lie, then ask yourself honestly, are you in love or living in an invisible prison? Stoicism doesn't teach you to shut off your heart, but it does teach you this. No one deserves your love more than your own inner freedom. And freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you want. It means living in line with your values, being trusted, being respected. If someone can't give you that, then they're not loving you with reason, they're loving you with fear. And no one can thrive in a love governed by fear. Not everyone who hurts you screams in your face. Not everyone who insults you comes off as aggressive. Some of the deepest wounds leave no bruises, no blood, no tears, because they're expertly disguised beneath something else, laughter. I lived with someone like that. She'd say things that caught me off guard, that stung, that made me question myself. And every time I reacted, every time I showed discomfort, she'd just smirk and say, "God, I was only joking. Why are you so serious?" That phrase, "just joking," is the perfect shield for any emotional hit. It leaves the person on the receiving end stuck, because if you respond, you're labeled as humorless, too sensitive, can't take a joke. And if you stay silent, they'll keep doing it. Next time sharper, meaner, more public. I still remember one gathering with friends. I had just shared an idea about starting a business. She laughed out loud. "Oh, please, stop dreaming. He'll quit after 3 days. That's how he is with everything." Everyone laughed. I sat there, frozen. After the party, I told her, "You shouldn't have said that in front of everyone." She tilted her head, eyes half pity, half contempt. "Oh, come on, it was just a joke. Why are you so weak?" That's when it hit me. The deepest cuts don't come from harsh actions. They come from casual comments, strategically delivered. Harmless on the surface, but aimed straight at your insecurities. And when you speak up, they neutralize your response with a single-word joke. Toxic people are skilled at using humor as a mask for insults, as camouflage for disrespect. They don't hit you. They poke at old wounds, twist the blade gently, then laugh it off. Relax, I was just teasing. And if you don't speak up, they'll do it again and again, until eventually you stop reacting altogether. Because reacting only makes you look like the guy who can't take a joke. In Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius once said, "Always say only what needs to be said. And if it hurts, let it come from kindness, not for entertainment." Laughter, when it lacks empathy, becomes a weapon. And when it's used to mask emotional harm, it's more dangerous than even the harshest words. A man once told me, "My wife keeps making jokes about our sex life in front of friends. Half-truths wrapped in laughter. I get embarrassed, I blush, but I don't know how to respond. When I ask her not to do it, she laughs. It's just for fun. Why are you so uptight?" Then she does it again and again, each time with more detail. He wasn't weak, but every time he became the punchline, he felt like he was being stripped naked in public. No one saw the wound because everyone was laughing, but he felt it, and it hurt. That's the tragedy of being with someone who constantly uses jokes to hurt you. You can't fight back because no one's on your side. Everyone thinks, "Come on, lighten up." And so you become the guy who ruins the mood, the one who's too sensitive, the killjoy, the selfish one. Eventually, you stop pushing back. You stop saying, "Please don't say that." You stop saying, "That didn't feel good." You go silent. But that silence doesn't protect you. It only gives them more room to keep going. Because they think you're okay with it. And if you take it once, they'll try again. Epictetus once said, "If you don't set boundaries for yourself, others will set them for you. And you won't like the results." That's especially true when you live with someone who doesn't understand limits, or deliberately crosses them, then hides behind the word joke. That joke might be a shot at your appearance, a dig at your career failures, a laugh at your family's expense, a mockery of how you eat, dress, talk, brushed off as just teasing. But where's the line between teasing and disrespect? The answer is simple. If the person being teased isn't laughing, it's not a joke. No matter what the speaker intended, the listener's feelings are the truth. And once someone says, "I don't like that," yet it keeps happening, it's no longer unintentional. It's deliberate. If you're in a relationship where the other person constantly makes you uncomfortable, embarrassed, or hurt, and always dismisses your feelings with just joking, then face the truth. You're not being weak. You're being emotionally manipulated. You're being disrespected. And you have every right, no, every responsibility to say, "That's not funny to me. Stop joking like that." Love means respecting each other's emotions, knowing where the line is, seeing pain in the eyes of someone you care about, even when they don't say a word. It's not about hurting them, then walking away guilt-free because it was just a joke. Not everyone has the patience to watch until the end, but those who do are always the ones who go further than the rest. If you're one of them, subscribe and like. We're on the same team. Not every manipulator is loud, controlling, or angry. Sometimes they're the one who cries in front of you, drops to their knees, begs for forgiveness, and promises to change. And then, just a few weeks later, everything is exactly as it was. I lived that cycle. Every time a major conflict happened, she didn't fight or argue. She broke down. She cried. She told me she knew she was wrong. She'd open up about her painful childhood, about never being truly loved, about how terrified she was of losing me. And then came the promises. She'd change. She'd listen. She wouldn't let it happen again. And I believed her. I believed her because I cared, because I thought, maybe she's really in pain. I believed her because I knew what it felt like to be wrong and want forgiveness. And because I believed, I stayed. I hoped, I worked to help her grow. But 2 weeks later, a month later, nothing had changed. The same yelling, the same control, the same coldness followed by tears. And every time, I fell into the same loop. Pain, pity, forgiveness, hope, disappointment. Emotional manipulation through tears, apologies, and promises is a subtle form of control. It's not brute force. It doesn't demand submission. It makes you want to stay, out of guilt, out of hope, out of the belief that you're the one who can save them. It makes you feel cruel for walking away, heartless for not forgiving, and guilty for losing faith. This is emotional blackmail through pity, the most effective weapon of people who refuse to change but don't want to be left behind. In Stoicism, this goes against a core principle, clearly distinguishing what's within our control and what's not. Epictetus said, "You cannot fix someone who doesn't want to fix themselves. You can only control how you respond." I used to think I was a good man for being patient, but the truth is, I was playing the savior in a story the other person had no intention of ending. They just needed me to stay, so the cycle could continue. Cry, promise, hurt, cry again, promise again. A man once told me, every time my wife screws up, she brings up how her mom abandoned her as a kid. She says that's why she's angry, jealous, and clingy. Every time I mention leaving, she drops to her knees and says she'll die if I walk out, and I don't dare leave. I feel like I'm holding her life in my hands. That's the core of this type of manipulation. It convinces you that you are responsible for their emotions, that if you leave, they'll fall apart, that you're their last hope. And so you stay stuck, trapped in the role of the good guy with no exit. Meanwhile, the manipulator knows exactly when to perform. They may be emotionally controlled most of the time, but suddenly they let it all out when they sense you're about to walk. They get honest only when you're exhausted. They cry only when you start packing. They promise to change only when they feel their grip on you slipping. Marcus Aurelius said, "Look at actions, not words." Emotions can lie, but repeated behavior doesn't. Someone can cry 100 times, but if nothing changes, those tears stop being remorse. They become a tool. It took me years to understand. Forgiveness isn't always love. Sometimes forgiving someone who refuses to change is enabling them to keep doing harm. You teach them, if I cry enough, you won't leave. And that's exactly what I used to believe. She once told me, if you leave me, I won't survive. And I was scared. I felt like I was holding life and death in my hands. But I forgot something. People don't die because they lose someone. They die when they no longer want to live. If she truly wanted to live right, she would have started fixing herself, not use tears to keep me from leaving. Stoicism teaches that kindness must have limits. Compassion doesn't mean submission. Mercy doesn't mean destroying yourself for someone who refuses to grow. If you're with someone who cries every time you try to walk away, who makes promises every time you say you've had enough, who begs whenever you set boundaries, you need to realize, not all tears are truth. Some people cry to manipulate. Some know that if they look broken enough, you'll come back. And once you do, they never have to change. You are not cruel for choosing to walk away. You're not to blame for being tired. You're not heartless for no longer believing the same old promises. You're just trying to protect what's left of yourself, so you can live. Some of the deepest pain doesn't come from being insulted or shouted at, or even from the compromises you make for love. It comes in that moment when you watch your own child flinch, shrink, or fall completely silent, just because someone walked into the room. That person might be their mother, might be their father. But one thing's clear, they are not someone a child should fear. I've witnessed it, and nothing has ever made me feel more like I'd failed as a father. She walked in the door, face cold, not saying a word. My son, who had just been playing and laughing, suddenly froze, hugged his toy to his chest, looked down, and went quiet. I whispered, "What's wrong, buddy?" He replied, "Mom's home. I'm not supposed to be loud." It was like someone punched the air out of my lungs. That's when I realized harm doesn't just happen between husband and wife. It spreads. It seeps into the kids, silently, ruthlessly. A toxic person doesn't need to hit a child to hurt them. All they have to do is fill the house with a cold, heavy atmosphere, tense enough that even a child knows being quiet is the safest option. And worst of all, they think that's normal. I lived in a house where every time she was angry, the whole place just stopped. No one spoke. No one turned on the TV. No one dared laugh. And my son, once lively, full of energy, started learning to avoid. He learned to read her expression to see if it was a safe day. He learned to hide his favorite toys. He pretended to be asleep when she got home. She never yelled at him, but he lived like he was always one breath away from punishment. Epictetus said, "Don't expect your child to thrive if you don't show them a healthy mind." But how can a child grow up healthy in a home where adults communicate only through silence, anger, sarcasm, and emotional punishment? How can a child learn to love when the first thing they learn is how to avoid a parent's rage? A man once told me, "I used to think it was fine as long as my son wasn't being hit. But then I saw it. Every time his mother screamed, he didn't cry. He just froze like a block of wood. That's when I knew he had gone numb." A child's numbness isn't a sign of strength. It's evidence of deep damage. When a kid learns, "Don't show emotion or you'll get in trouble," it means they've developed a survival reflex. Not because they were taught, but because they had to. And that's when pieces of their childhood begin to disappear, one moment at a time. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Every action we take is a lesson to those closest to us, and children learn fastest. They don't follow your words, they follow your example." If a child sees his dad silently enduring disrespect, sees his mom ruling everything through anger, sees a house where no one speaks honestly, that becomes their blueprint for relationships. My son once asked me, "Dad, why is mom always so mad? What did we do to make her angry all the time?" I didn't know what to say. What can you tell a 5-year-old? Should I explain that his mother has emotional control issues? That his parents are in a silent war? No, I just said, "Mom's tired. Try to be good, okay?" Then I walked back into my room, sat down, and realized I was helping to maintain a toxic environment. Because if I don't stand up, who's going to protect my son? Stoicism doesn't teach us to explode with rage, but it teaches us to know the difference between what can be endured and what must never be tolerated. If your own home is a place where your child can't relax, can't express themselves, can't laugh, can't make mistakes, then it's not a home. It's a prison. Some people will say, "But she doesn't hit your kid, right?" No. But the cold voice, the scowl when walking into a room, the silent commands shot through a glare, that's more than enough for a child to learn fear without ever feeling a slap. A mother once told me, "I didn't do anything to my kid. They're just too sensitive." But I want to say this to her and to anyone using coldness, control, and unspoken commands to shape their child. Kids aren't too sensitive. Adults have forgotten they are the mirror. If you're living in a home where your child goes quiet, lowers their head, or physically pulls away when the other person walks in, that's not manners. That's survival instinct. And if you stay quiet, if you keep hoping it'll pass someday, your child will learn to live in submission, in silence, in surrender, the same way you have. Epictetus once said, "If you can't change another person, you can still change the environment you choose to live in." And if that environment is hurting your child, that's no longer a personal choice. It's your responsibility. No one imagines a grown man with a family, a house, children, could feel like a stranger in his own home. But the truth is, countless men are living that exact reality every day. They have no voice, no choice, no authority. They're present in the house, but absent from their own life. I was one of them. I came home from work, walked into a house I helped build, sat at the family dinner table, paid every bill, made sure my kid was fed, clothed, educated. But deep down, I knew I was no longer the man of that house. Every decision, from changing the curtains to rearranging the living room to what we'd eat for dinner, happened without me. I wasn't asked, I was informed. At first I thought, it's fine, as long as everything's running smoothly. But then I noticed I didn't like coming home. The closer I got to the front door, the more tension I felt. I walked in like I was trying not to upset anyone. I sat down like I needed permission. No matter what I wore, she had something negative to say. No matter what I said, she'd cut me off. I slowly taught myself to shut up, to stay out of the way, to shrink into a version of myself that wouldn't bother anyone. And eventually, I was still living in my house, but I wasn't living as myself. Toxic people don't always control with yelling or fists. Sometimes they control by slowly pushing you to the edge. Without kicking you out, they make you feel like you no longer belong. And the hardest part is, you're still there. Every day. A man once told me, "I live in my own house, but I'm not allowed to touch anything. The table I bought, the chair I picked, it all gets replaced. Anytime I offer an opinion, my wife rolls her eyes. Eventually, I started feeling like an ATM machine that just happens to live there. You know you've become a stranger in your own family when you're left out of decisions, mocked for showing emotion, and walk on eggshells every time you speak. You start asking for permission to enjoy your own hobbies. You explain yourself every time you come home late. You have to justify why you want to go out alone. Worst of all, you have no personal space. Every corner, every item, every plan is controlled. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you lose the right to live in accordance with your nature, you've lost everything, even if you're still alive." In that house, I was technically alive. I ate, slept, went to work. But I wasn't me anymore. I had become a version tailored to meet someone else's expectations, the agreeable husband, the harmless father, the man who never makes waves. But that version didn't make me happy. It killed me, little by little. A friend of mine after his divorce told me, "The lightest moment I've ever felt wasn't getting my assets back. It was waking up that first morning in a rented apartment and making coffee exactly the way I like it, without anyone criticizing me." It sounded so small, but I knew exactly what he meant, because I'd longed for that kind of freedom too. Stoicism doesn't tell you to run from hardship, but it does teach you to recognize what can be changed through effort and what must be let go of to preserve your soul. A man who's trying his best, providing, parenting, being decent, doesn't deserve to be pushed out of his own family life. But many women, often unaware, slowly erase their partner's role by invalidating every contribution. They don't yell, they don't fight, they just ignore your voice long enough, seize every bit of control in the home, and create an environment where your silence becomes expected until you're no longer the head of the household, just a body present, denied the right to live fully. People often ask, why do so many divorced men seem happier, even in smaller homes? The answer is simple, because finally, they can breathe. They can live. They can own their space, no matter how small. They can move through life without asking for permission. If you're living in a house where you always feel in the wrong, where you always need approval, where you're constantly watching your step, then ask yourself honestly, is this really still your home? A real home isn't a place where you stick around just because. It's where you have the right to exist fully, unapologetically, as who you are. If not, then that house is just a hotel, and you're paying for it every day with your dignity, your freedom, and your very sense of self. If you've made it this far, there's a good chance you've realized something. What I've shared isn't foreign to you. It's not theory. It's not someone else's story. It's yours. The story of a man who once believed silence was the way to keep his family together. A man who apologized for things that weren't his fault. A man who lived in his own home but felt like a guest. We've been conditioned to sacrifice, to endure, to say it's fine when someone crosses the line. But that conditioning doesn't bring peace. It brings paralysis. It keeps you breathing, but not alive. It keeps you present, but not yourself. Epictetus once said, freedom doesn't begin with doing whatever you want. It begins with saying no to what harms you. Don't wait for them to change. Don't hope for one more promise, one more tear, one more apology. If you've been through this cycle too many times, what you need isn't another chance. It's a boundary. From this moment on, set your line, not to punish anyone, but to save yourself. Step out of the silence. Say it out loud. I don't want to live like this anymore. Stop trying to fit into someone else's comfort, and start living by your own values. If you're a father, then this isn't just about you. It's your duty, because your kids are watching. They don't need your words. They see how you endure. They see your sadness. They see how you shrink a little more each day. And one day, they'll mirror what they saw. So don't wait. Healing begins with one decision, to no longer let others define your worth. If anything in this message felt like it came from your own life, leave a comment. Say you've been through it. Share the story you've kept buried. Because maybe, just maybe, your story will help another man realize he's not alone. And if this video hit something real inside you, share it. Because somewhere out there, another man is silently enduring. And he needs to hear this, just like you did. Follow this channel, not for the views, but so we can step out of silence together. So we can heal. So we can return to who we were meant to be. Strong, grounded, and no longer letting anyone manipulate the heart that still beats inside us.